This is the school food waste and composting training. Let's dive in with Corey, the compost worm. Oh, welcome to the Food Waste Diversion School Roundtable. So we can really hear from some schools who are already diverting their food waste.
I'm Kat Buxton. I live in Thetford and I work with Thetford Elementary School on their composting program with 5th and 6th graders. It's a K through 6 school. And I do a lot of work around the state on various composting initiatives with students and adults and others. Do you want me to go ahead and start my...
I think you can go ahead and, you can go ahead and dive right in.
All right. I just put together some short slides to talk about how I work with schools. So I do composting consulting with schools around the state, mostly pre-COVID, although there are some schools now, like you guys in Unity, and a few other schools that are trying to ramp up their programs, especially because post-COVID, we're looking at a lot of outdoor classrooms. My slides are advancing without me. Okay. So when I go into a school, the most important thing, I think it's actually what I do rather than, and composting is really easy. The hard part is the social infrastructure. I like to call that the social mycelium. So the network of support it takes to build the long-term resilience of a program. So that really has a lot to do with people. So I've put together these basic 10 steps that I work with a school. I find that it takes a school about 2 years to get to the point where they're actually composting. And composting is absolutely the easiest part. So I'll just briefly go over these. You want to have your team of stakeholders, and that should always include cafeteria, maintenance, some administration and teaching staff, ideally some parents and students. Agreeing on a purpose and vision is really important at the beginning of the process. And this includes things like, are we just managing waste? Are we going to build curriculum? Are the students going to do the work? Is maintenance going to do the work? Are we gardening? What are we going to use the compost for? That sort of thing. Then locating all of the waste generators is actually a little harder than you might think. We tend to go right to the cafeteria, and if a school has a cafeteria, certainly the cafeteria and kitchen are a large generator of food waste, but classroom and teacher room, especially in elementary schools, are also very large generators, and where a lot of the problems can happen in terms of fruit flies and messiness and things that make people not want to be involved in collecting food waste or composting. Then developing where are you going to compost? Where are you going to collect your food waste? Where are you going to bring it to do the composting if you're going to decide to compost? So those are all really important things too, and they need to involve the cafeteria, the maintenance staff, and ideally the school nurse. And then developing clear and concise separation systems, making it really easy for students who only have 20 minutes to eat in the first place to find what to do with their waste. And ideally also doing the education to reduce that food waste at the very beginning of the whole project. And then implementation, monitoring, collecting feedback, making sure that you're implementing that feedback as it comes in. That really deepens ownership of a project, and especially student and administrative and staff feedback, all of it, cafeteria, maintenance, everybody. It's really important to have people feel like their concerns are being heard the entire time during the process. And then depending on what you're doing with your waste, ideally, I'm a big fan of composting on site and using it for curriculum, but so tracking your daily and weekly volume before and after is really important. Before, to realize how much waste are you actually generating? Do you need to hire it out? How many buckets do you need? How big of a compost bin do you need? What are those kinds of food waste? Those are really important too. And then as you implement a system, just constantly working to improve those systems and exploring source reduction along the way. Hopefully you're going to choose to compost and it's going to be curriculum oriented. But if you choose to do a hauler or a farmer, you want to make sure that your system is going to work for them. What sorts of things can and can't go in the compost? How often do they pick up? What kinds of buckets do they need? Where do they need to go? And then to build the infrastructure to support that plan. And that will look differently depending on what you're choosing. So I'll just go over a few options. I think you guys have had a pretty good introduction to these. So I just want to make sure everybody understands the pros and cons between the various options that are in place right now in Vermont and New Hampshire. And it's worth also noting that some of these, there are more small scale independent haulers available now working on small on-farm composting projects or just yard projects that are large piles but staying underneath Agency of Natural Resources regulations. So there may be other options other than a farm or a food hauler like Grow Compost or one of the big ones in your area, Casellas, etc. So you can choose a hauler. It costs money. You can still do curriculum around food waste. You can do it around environmental stewardship and waste reduction. There's lots of extensions to work on just understanding the food waste problem, where it comes from, where it goes, why do we even have one? And you're not going to get free compost, and you will probably have more bins to wash because you'll have larger bins that are more difficult to get into, but it's possible that your hauler will do all of that washing for you. So that might also work out as well. You can feed livestock, and there are definitely regulations to consider. Ideally, you want to find a family with some hens, egg-laying hens or meat birds. But when you begin to feed livestock, you're going to get into needing to make sure that certain things are or are not in the food scraps, if nothing else, really making sure there's no trash and fruit stickers and paper towels and things like that, because that can really be a problem for the animals. And if you get into pigs, that can get really tricky, especially with USDA regulations for pig markets. Composting on site is definitely where I put the biggest list of pros. The cons are that you will have to spend a little bit more at the beginning, and maybe even a lot more depending on how fancy you are with your system, but then that pays off over the years. At Thetford Elementary School, we used to pay for one dumpster a week to haul away all of our trash, which included our food scraps. And since composting and then enhancing our recycling program, we've reduced that to one dumpster a month. So that's a 75% savings every single month for years now. So really, it has paid for our composting system, although we haven't run those numbers to prove that. That would be a fun thing to do. You are going to need more space, and not all schools have the perfect space, especially those that are in more urban settings. It can be a real challenge to find the right space that isn't taking from student space. In some schools, that can be a real commodity. Where do students hang out? And they need to have their outdoor spaces, especially now in this world where we're doing so much remote learning. So those are some of the cons to doing the composting on site, but the pros, in my opinion, far outweigh any of the cons. And once you get going, we're in our 11th year composting now at Thetford Elementary. And I've got some slides to show you, just a few slides to show you what we're doing over there. We have built this really incredible network of community resilience around our system. We have horse farmers, and we have horse farmers that provide us poop. And we have a couple suppliers. We have parents that have chickens that come pick up food scraps. We have a really good relationship with our maintenance staff at our school and the one next door. Our cafeteria staff is incredible. We've really tightened the link between things like the cafeteria, the maintenance, the school, teachers, and other administrators in the school. Everybody hears each other and sees each other in a way that they didn't before, because we've all come together around this idea of celebrating food and gardens and waste and composting and curriculum and science. So this is all the little red circles there, just showing you some of the other connections, and it just keeps going. And I'm another one of those connections. I just happen to live in the community, and I'm a food, soil, and compost educator, and I've been working with these students for years, and it's been amazing to connect with them, their siblings, and their parents, and the greater community, to see more and more people actually wanting to manage their own food waste. This is a picture I just took today, actually. So the way we work it now at Thetford Elementary, post-COVID, things had to change. It used to be that every classroom in the school had their snack bucket, and they would bring it to a central location in the lobby. It was part of daily classroom chores. Every classroom had the chore, and it worked beautifully. It was great. But now with COVID, we're trying to limit the number of students in a hallway at any given time. So rather than have a community collection area, we've enlisted the 5th grade. Last year, 5th and 6th grade were combined. This year they're separated. So that has helped us. When 5th and 6th are recombined again, we'll have to rethink how we're doing this, but we're good for this year. So every single day at 12:30, 2 5th graders go, and they go down to the cafeteria. They collect the wagon with the food scraps from the kitchen. They collect the paper towel bin, and they go through all the hallways in the school collecting food scrap bins and paper towel bins from outside of every classroom. And then they leave this wagon at the foot of the 6th grade classroom, where they go and take it out for a compost deposit at 12:45. So right after they're done. When I got there today, these kids were nearly done with the route. They don't need my help. They totally got it. They're clean. They wear gloves. They knock the buckets. They know just what to do. And then they put the buckets back in place, and then it's the responsibility of every classroom to keep their bucket clean. And if we find trash in the bucket, we put it right back in the bucket. So it's actually proving to be a really good way to show, hey, wait, that wasn't compostable, folks. That came from your bin. So this new way of doing things has created a little bit of accountability for what people are putting into our system. So we were excited to see what the students do with that. These are our 6th graders making a compost deposit. I have tons of video footage of these kids. They're incredible. They know just what to do. We have an iPad set up with a Google form that I have developed, and I just update it every year. I use student feedback to make that form better and better, so that we're collecting the right information and not redundant information. And then they use the data from the form that they collect for math and science curriculum. So we collect temperature in 3 spots every day. We take the squeeze test, and we have all sorts of metrics to be able to define what our moisture and temperature content is, and how often we need to turn it, and lots of places for observations, like, did you notice any critters, or were there any smells, bees, was it, were parts dry and parts wet, visual things like that. So that's been working out really well, and the kids, they have it down. Just today, we got to our 130-degree temperature mark after, this is our 8th day dumping in the compost. So it takes about that long to get the temperature rolling till we can get the right amount of mass. The bin system that we have is the one on the lower right, and this was put in before we decided that we needed a roof. So this is an important feature. If you're thinking about composting at schools, we're in school during some pretty bad weather. So making sure that there's a covered space for your bins is important. So what we've done now is we've actually extended the roof off of that shed, and we have a big enough area in front of those bins to be able to walk to and fro with wheelbarrows and the 35-gallon buckets. So there's no excuse for bad weather. Compost gets dumped 3 days a week. And we do 3 days a week because 1 day a week we feed chickens. We feed families, hens, food scraps, because we also like to talk about the triangle of food waste and source reduction, and making sure that everyone's fed before we make our compost is actually really important, even though I'm a compost geek and a bit greedy for healthy soil. We do want to feed animals first. And then on Wednesdays, post-COVID, we only have a half a day of school. So we just don't collect on Wednesdays. So the students dump Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Fridays, chickens are fed. We always dump in the bin all the way to the right. And that's important too, to make sure that in your systems, it's very, very clear what to do. The only bin that ever gets dumped in is that 5th bin all the way to the right-hand side. The rest of those bins are for post turns after a bin is filled. We turn it a few times before it goes into a compost windrow. So for the first 3 or 4 years, this project didn't run so smooth. There were all sorts of fires to put out. We had mice, we had some flies, we had dirty buckets, we had disgruntled maintenance people, and through careful listening to everyone involved, we've managed to solve every single one of those problems. And at this point, we now just improve our system every year. And I find that the greatest input comes from the students who are doing this work every day. They also let us know what they want to know. Why are we doing this? Things like that are important. So I've developed now slideshows for students that they see every fall that connect global issues like climate change and landfills filling up, methane production, soil degradation, to composting at school, so that they can have a better understanding of the big why of why we're doing this. These other 2 composting systems, I was involved with the one on the bottom left, that is Marlboro Elementary School. And it's a beautiful system. I'm actually not sure what they're doing with it now. I hope they're using it, but they've had some turnover with principals over the last few years. And I know it can be a big learning curve for a principal to get to know a school, never mind try and institute a composting program. I do also work with Sharon Elementary School. They have a similar program to Thetford. Their bins are a little bit smaller. They are covered. They have not figured out their recipe quite yet, but we're working on it for them. And the reason they haven't figured out their recipe is just because it can be a bit crazy at school, and sometimes things don't happen the way they should. And then the one on the top right is Ferrisburg, and this is one of the pioneer buildings in Vermont for composting. I know the folks at Highfields Compost Institute were highly involved in getting that going, and it's a really stellar system. That's a super fancy one if you can afford it. Our system cost us about $5,000 to initially install, and then the roof cost us about $6,000 to extend that roof system. And every 10 years, we have to do some maintenance on the bin, and we're kind of on a rotating system. So every year we replace a couple of boards or a single bin, but not all 5 at once. So I'm gonna stop it. Oh, those are just some other systems. I'm happy to talk more about those in Q&A, but I'll stop it there because I want to hear about Plainfield.
Kat, would you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Would you, I do not have a slideshow, but I think it's really important if you go back like 2 slides to the picture of yours. And I'll start there. So go back 1 more.
Okay. Wait. Okay.
1 more. Okay, that's perfect. Okay. So if you look at Thetford's, which is the one with the blue, there's a few things. The blue is styrofoam, I imagine.
That's right. It's insulation, which isn't necessary, but we use it mostly because it makes people feel better.
Well, and also it'll keep it warmer, right? And then the second thing, the second thing I want to bring up, because I don't have any pictures or anything because I ran out of school today and I have never taken pictures of my kids, which is awful composting, is you have a pulley system here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to see, but the pulley system is really important because if you're having 5th or 6th or 7th graders try and pull up the bin to put the compost in it, they're not strong enough. And so they can pull on that and then it'll stay up. There's probably a little place to tie it over on the side and it will stay up and they won't conk their carrots, as I like to say, when they're putting the compost in there and then putting the leaves in or whatever brown matter you're gonna put in. So if you guys have not built your compost systems yet, that pulley system is really kind of key. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, that's it. My name is Jennifer Frederick. I work at Plainfield Elementary School. I'm just going to talk to you guys, which is not as nice as the cool pictures, but I just don't have any. So I have been at Plainfield now for 3 years. Around 10 years ago, I used to live in Plainfield, and we moved to Sunapee, which is where I currently live. And then I went back to Plainfield to teach. So I have the blessing of teaching at Plainfield. Plainfield is a really special community. Most of our kids have animals of some sort, and the environment is very important to people, and it's a pretty progressive community, I think. We're very place-based education focused. So we are encouraged to go outside. We're encouraged to do lots of things. So in kindergarten, first and second grade, they have a garden. And so they do a whole unit on gardening, and they have for years and years and years. And they grow seeds. They put the garden in the spring, and then families volunteer to take care of it all summer. And then in the fall, they harvest, and the kindergarten teachers and the first grade teachers and the second grade teachers read stone soup. And then people in the past have brought things in, and they've made a whole soup together. So that's been happening for like 10 or 12 years, or maybe even longer. So when I arrived back at Plainfield 3 years ago, Kathleen Maslin and her husband, Fritz, I think, and the Boy Scouts from Cornish had one of the Eagle Scout projects had been to build the compost bins that we have. So they are covered, and we have 2 bins with pulley systems on either side. And they're about, I would say, chest high and about 5 feet wide. And there's 2 of them. Nice little cover. And so that's the story of how they got here. The first year that I was teaching there, the year before, Kathleen was teaching second grade, I think, at the time, and she paired up her second graders with some 7th and 8th graders that were interested in doing a compost club. And they started collecting compost from the classrooms. Plainfield has always eaten lunch and snack in their rooms. We don't have a cafeteria. Back in the day, it was an open school. So things like that they just didn't have it. It always ate community based. And so they weighed the compost, and they took it out and they put it in the bins, and they didn't do anything with it. And our custodian at that time was not super excited about it, but he said, whatever, you guys deal with it. So you put it out there. So the year that I got there, Kathleen was waiting to start it with her kids because they were waiting to talk about the weight and the measurement and do the math behind it. And I was like, well, Kathleen, it seems like if we're going to use the composter, we should probably use it. So I said, it'll be one of the 7th graders' jobs, because we have classroom jobs in the middle school because it's a K-8 school. So we do this. We have different jobs than the first and second graders or the 3rd and 4th graders, but we still have jobs. So I decided that that my 7th graders would take the compost out, and then I went to our custodians, and we have 2 female custodians that are absolutely amazing. And I was like, all right, so I'm just going to do the compost. And they were like, okay. But then they had to figure out, they said, well, what are we going to compost? What aren't we going to compost? And so I went on Google and I searched it, and we printed out little signs for every classroom that said what you can compost and what you can't compost. And we did that. So each classroom got one, a little sign that they put above their sink if they had a sink in their room, or their compost bucket where they had their compost bucket. And then everyone's job, one of the jobs would be composter. And so the compost kids, K6 and 8th grade, would bring their bucket of compost from snack and lunch down and put it in the compost near where, it's not a cafeteria, but near where the food services people are. And the custodian would be there, and she would tell the kids if it was trash or compost or where to put it. And kids that are bringing trays back would just put their waste directly in the compost bin, and milk and liquids would go in another bin. So that would be different. So that wouldn't get put in our trash bins either. The milk got put into the septic I think. So that's, we worked it out, and Leah and Jana came up with their own system for right outside the tray return area. And so they would collect milk. And we also use silverware. We don't use plastic. Well, right now we're using plastic again, but we're talking about switching back to not using plastic again. So compost, trash, and then milk, and then silverware and trays all went in one specific area. And then my kids, after they were done with recess, would go down, bring our compost bucket down, and then they would bring all of the compost out. And it was a 2-person job. So 1 person on either side. And then they put their composting stuff into the compost, and then they come back in, they rinse the container, and they put the container exactly where it was. So we've had a few instances where we've had fruit flies in classrooms if the kids or the teachers have forgotten to bring their compost down, and we rinse them out, we clean them out, and we do a really good job, and then we're done with that. Last year, I had one boy that was absolutely amazing, and he took it upon himself to do the compost every single day. So it was his job. And he was like, and this is what I'm doing. And he got really excited about it. And when I talked to him about it this year, he's like, I said, okay, we're not composting yet because our real focus was on just teaching again because it had been so long. So I said to David the other day, I'm like, okay, we're going to start composting again. Do you want to be involved? And he's like, oh my gosh, yes. Just tell me when and how. And I was like, all right, well, I'd like you to kind of figure out the how with me. And he was like, okay, that's great. And so, of course, I haven't seen him more than 5 minutes in the past week, even though I teach him, but separately. So I really like the cart idea, Kat. I'm going to steal that because the teachers are moving from room to room to room this year. So the kids, and we have wind time at the end of the day, but I need time. So I'm just going to get another cart, and I'm going to have David or my 7th graders go around and pick up all the stuff and then bring it outside and then rinse it. And I like how each class is responsible for their own bucket. So if they have a sink in their room, great, they can rinse it out. And if they don't, then they'll have to figure that out.
It's their responsibility. So I wanted to say, in addition to the cart, I just ordered a wheelie bottom for the paper towel bin.
Oh, okay.
Right now, the kids are putting it on the wagon, but they're getting a wheelie bottom because we collect brown paper towels as one of our carbon material ingredients for our compost.
Oh, that's good. Oh, yeah.
Not from the bathroom or the nurse's office.
Right.
Comfort levels, but the elementary schools, lots of.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The other thing is we have hay outside that we use for our brown materials or leaves. And so the kids will put hay and brown material in. The one thing that there's a few things that we're missing. But I was thinking that it would be really cool. There's some really cheap little digital thermometers that you can get that will sync up to this. And so you could strategically place those relatively cheap digital thermometers that are just like, they're little like beads or something like that. And then you would get that feedback of temperature, just like if you were getting it from a weather station. I haven't done that yet. That's been in my head for quite some time, but instead of sticking that big thermometer down into the middle, they would already be there. And you could even look at different strata levels and take the temperatures on those different levels. We don't use the composting to teach with because it's kind of just ingrained in the culture of school that this is what we do. And so I don't need the big why because people compost at home. And so of course we would compost at school, which sounds a little strange. And we should be going over the why, and maybe they are in the younger grades when they're talking about the plants and gardening and things like that. But my kids kind of get like, they come into school and they're like, well, where am I supposed to, am I really just going to throw away this banana peel right now? Like that is not what we do here. So it's kind of culturally how we do things. So the why is just a little embedded underneath kind of thing. I like to call Plainfield upscale agrarian, and then that kind of flows with what we do. So I, I guess that's it. Let me see. I'll check my notes here. Oh, our stakeholders are, the principal is a great stakeholder. She's a huge advocate. Our 2 custodians are amazing stakeholders. All of the K2 staff, the 3-5 staff, and the 6-8 staff are in. Our latest is we currently have plastic silverware in with our hot lunches. And a student said, well, why are we using plastic silverware? Maybe we should all just bring our silverware from home and then bring it home every night and then wash it. And some of the teachers were like, yes, but what about the kids that forget it? Of course there's going to be kids that forget it, but we always have, like everyone, always have extra silverware that we can lend to kids. And either it can be plastic that we throw away, or we can wash the silverware is my thought. But I'm a little bit less globally overall worried. I think that's if we're washing our hands for 2 minutes or at happy birthday twice, then if we wash the silverware for happy birthday twice, it should be fine too. Cart, lunch, 3 containers, 7th graders job, silverware. Oh, we also have a, since we're talking about reducing waste across the board, we also have a single sort recycling. So anything that's recycling, any type of plastic, any type of anything, will automatically go in the recycling, and then that's taken out. So I don't know, Leah and Jenna and I have talked quickly because I asked them, I said, well, do you think that since we started composting and with the recycling program, we've reduced the waste? And they were both like, yes. We don't have a number though, so it's not quantifiable. It's only qualitative data. School boards don't like qualitative data. They want quantitative data. And so I wish I had that to bring to you guys, and I wish that I had that for myself, because as a science teacher, I'm like, I want numbers. I don't want like, oh, this feels good. I want like numbers. So I don't have that information, and I apologize. And that's about it. How's that? Perfect. All right. Thank you. Do you guys have questions for Kat or I?
Oh. So do you compost, this is Maureen, do you compost just vegetables and breads and stuff? Do you put meat and dairy in a, I know you do, you throw out the milk, but what about cheese and meat?
The cheese goes in, and I think it would be lunch meat, I imagine, if it was caught. Like pizza day pizza is going to go in the compost. I think that there's probably a small amount of meat, not a large amount of meat that goes in there. Like I know that Janet and Leah would try and take the meat out, and that would go in the trash, because we would have animals, and animals in schools are not friends. But I think that the dairy, other than the milk, does go in there. And if it's pepperoni pizza on Pizza Wednesday, that might go in there too.
So does that happen in Thetford as well?
No, we compost all meat, all food scraps, all milk.
I thought yours looked liquidy.
Yeah. In fact, a little story there. A couple years ago, we got a bulk milk machine as a part of our waste reduction efforts, and it changed our compost. We had to start adding water to our compost because it was thirsty. The milk, because little kids waste a lot of milk when it comes in those cartons. And we went to a bulk milk machine. They were able to take just as much as they were going to drink. And so we didn't have wet compost. And so we had to develop a system of a squeeze test, and kids assessing moisture and determining whether they're going to put 1 to 3 gallons of water in every day when they deposit. So it's been a really great science process. And now we're not using the bulk milk machine yet because of COVID and transitions. So right now we're adding less water. But yeah, we compost everything. And the little kids like to say that we find dinosaur bones in the finished compost, which isn't that far off the mark, really, because chickens are dinosaurs, right? Yeah, but we get super high heat, and we do have an insulated system, and it's very well maintained. Yeah. I could also say, I guess I left out the little kids. So every kid in the school does have a role in composting. This year it's a little less because the snack bucket job is no longer a thing for the little kids. But we also have school gardens, extensive school gardens with multiple raised beds and fruit trees and pumpkin patches, and the little kids all have their own garden, and so they find the dinosaur bones in the garden. We also add finished compost in, and they know about the snack bucket in their room. And we always talk about the process of the food cycle, we call it at school, because we grow food, it goes to the school cafeteria, it goes to the food scrap bin, it goes to the compost, then it goes back to the garden. And kids know this process, and the older that they get in their grades, the more they learn about the science of that process. So by the time they're in 3rd or 4th grade, they've usually met my worms. I bring in my worms for a school field trip. I have a worm composting bin, which are fun to have in classrooms, but not at all suitable to manage the kind of waste that comes out of schools. And this year with COVID, I don't know how the worms are going to fly, but I'm bringing them, even if I have to do it outside, because it's a great experience for the kids. And they start to learn about what things can eat and what things can't. And then they really start to learn about microbes. I do a big soil science unit with the 6th graders. I also just want to make sure that you all know that all of my resources are free, including, like, if you end up doing curriculum stuff and you want my Google form, you got it. I'll send it along in a form that you can modify it and make it your own. Yeah, ongoing, it's all free. We want all schools composting and feeling really good and comfortable about it. So whatever we can do to make that happen. Also, our students are available. So for instance, we have Woodstock High, we have a 7th grade science teacher who's trying to arrange a time for our students to do a live Zoom of a compost deposit for her students so that they can have like a Q&A. So I just want to hold that open as a possibility. Always difficult to plan with multiple teachers and students, but I'm game. It's a great experience for the kids they get very proud of the system that they run. It's fun for me to hear them talk about it.
Does the community of Thetford actually have their own composting facility at their like town dump or whatever you have there?
We have a collection facility. So we've got a little roofed area with 3 or 4 35-gallon totes. And then we have a local woman who works at the recycling center who is also a farmer and brings all of that food waste to her land and does small scale community composting. So no, we don't officially, but we just happen to have someone really knowledgeable, and I consult with them as well. But our town collection center is collecting for anyone in town, and that includes Meat Your Bones.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
and
think
a lot of people, in fact, backyard composters will often try to manage most of their food scraps on their own and then save their meat and bones to bring to the town collection facility, because it can be challenging to manage meat and bones in the backyard without attracting animals.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I just want to throw out one more suggestion that some schools that I've worked with found it easier to start with only kitchen scraps. Don't even get into the classrooms. Some went the other way. Only classroom scraps. Don't even get into the kitchen. So don't feel like you have to do it all. You could start slow.
I was just going to say the Unity teachers, that Dawn Dextrose from Sullivan County Exchange is an amazing resource, and she actually has a soil tunnel that you guys can borrow.
You're so cool.
Yeah, it's really cute, and she made it herself, and I don't know what her availability is, but she's a great resource, and I've worked with her a ton with compost not so much with compost, but with a lot of other stuff too. But she would be a great resource for you guys as well.
Thank you. We've worked with Dawn with some other stuff, but not with the composting. So that is a good resource for us to use. Thanks.
We have some examples, Thetford and Plainfield, but if anyone's heard of other models integrating with other grade levels.
Talk about one in West Fairleigh is a K through 4 school, and they have a pretty successful composting program. It's a small school. It's more like a backyard compost. I'm not sure if they're doing meat and bones, but they've been doing it for quite a while with strong community support. So they've always had at least a teacher or two and a community member or two that are on call to sort of manage that system. And it is a small community, but that really impressed me for a K to 4 school to be in a multi-year program at this point.
Does anybody have any more questions or thoughts, comments, anything? This is our last training, so I think even if it's not on the topic we're talking about right now, I think you can bring it forward.
Well, I have another suggestion at the risk of being the one that talks all the time. Sorry.
Hey.
I am a master composter in the state of Vermont, EMG master composter, and I'm not sure if what New Hampshire has as a partnering program. Natasha may be aware of that.
We have a
I have found
program,
that
not a master composter program.
What's that?
We have a master gardener program, but we don't have a master composter. There are some resources from the state, but it's not as extensive as in Vermont.
It may be possible. So one of the things that I've done is with Sharon and, well, I had worked with Stratford Elementary for a while, and then also the Thetford Elementary. I am the project leader for a compost service site. So it's a master gardener service site, which enables incoming master gardeners or master composters that are looking for their intern hours to do some volunteer time, managing the pile, learning about the pile, and there's a strong educational exchange. So it's not just free labor, there's some writing that happens and community engagement, but it has been incredibly helpful, especially for schools just getting started. And it's also been incredibly helpful for the interns that are seeing a style of system that they don't normally get to manage. So it's been really rewarding for them to also see really bad systems fixed, which can be really nice. That's something you should know. No compost is so bad that it cannot be fixed.
Yeah, I'll just chime in quickly and agree with everything that Kat just said. And there are, Olivia, just so you know, Kat did the master composter training, which is how last year, which is how we met through UVM. And there are often folks from New Hampshire doing the UVM training and coming over to Ludlow for the site training. But I do wonder if like as that happens, there's potential to just build that network of New Hampshire folks who have gone through some sort of master composter training, and it would look a little bit different, but I think could serve much of the same purposes and same resources for your communities.
So is the master composter training, you've mentioned UVM, but are there other sites for that training?
So UVM Extension hosts the Master Gardener and Master Composter programs. It's an online program. Anyone can do it, in-state, out-of-state, it doesn't matter. It costs a little bit different if you're out of state. And then 2 years ago, they added on, and I teach one of the modules, and I'm actually picking up a couple because some folks are not able to do their modules this year. So I'm doing a little bit more this year, but 2 years ago, they added on a in-person site training for people who want it. And I do both of those as well. We do one at Ludlow, where we were this past Saturday for sort of the southern Vermont. And then we do the second training at a similar demonstration site in St. Albans, which was one of my pilot sites 3 years ago. And so it's an opportunity very similar to what we did on Saturday, a little bit structured a little bit differently. So that just gives the master composter students some hands-on, real life, what do these different systems look like? What does it really mean? Like, you've done this sort of online training, but then, well, what does it actually feel like in your fingers, kind of training. And then last Saturday as well, you met Mary Beth, who did the same that same program through UVM with Olivia last year, and now she's their intern at the Ludlow Community Garden Community Compost site. So she's working under Phil, who is their master composter. But I think that, part of why it's a little bit less expensive for Vermonters is because then we have this volunteer and intern structure set up for people who go through the program. And the assumption is that, and so we try to pair them with projects in state, but with people doing it, and then a lot of states don't. I mean, we have people from Arizona, we have people from New Mexico, we have people from, some of the southern states all over. And there's other places that do it as well. We're not the only program, certainly, where you can do it online from, as an out-of-state person. So there's a number of different master composter programs available throughout the country. We're just a close neighbor, and then if you can make the trip, you can do the hands-on in-person training as well. And I think that's a draw for our neighboring states.
That's a great point, Natasha. I wonder if I could get a list of New Hampshire.
I have the list, but we could also get you a formal list. So with where everybody is, where they're from. And so, and then I can tell you it's just starting up this year, but in fact, this week I think they've done the intro module, but this week is the first live Q&A week. And for this year, and I think Brett said that at last count, there were like 95 people signed up for this year.
Wow.
But yeah. And about 2/3 of them are from Vermont, and about 1/3 is out-of-staters. And so I don't know yet if, I haven't really looked through the details yet. That's my job tomorrow, because I'm doing a live Q&A on Thursday. But certainly I think that they would be very open to sharing, anyone who's gone through their program who's in New Hampshire with you, and you can start your, that could be, maybe form the basis of an in-state network for you all.
Now, that could be really helpful option to pull up on.
Yeah, follow up with me on that, because I might not remember tomorrow to send you the names I have. But
Most of the schools that I know that compost are in Vermont. They're not in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's also, there's a lot of, I know there's this incentive for the Vermont master composter interns to do projects in Vermont, but, there's a lot of folks that are on the border, it's, in some cases it might be easier and more convenient for them to pair with someone across the border in New Hampshire than to go, to find something somewhere else. So, I wouldn't say that, I think that we could explore that possibility more. Brett, because they're also funded in part by they get a stipend from the state. There might be some resistance to actually actively sending Vermont master composters to work in New Hampshire, but functionally, I think in many ways it makes sense. And there's a real move in Vermont to start, especially along our state boundaries, to be thinking about waste sheds. Like there's watersheds. And so, for instance, in Wyndham Solid Waste Management District in Brattleboro, they take stuff from, over the border because it's just where they are. It's the convenient place, and with your trucking stuff. And so they've really, Bob Spencer, who's the district manager there, has really started mobilizing and talking around, thinking of things in terms of waste sheds and what makes sense more than a geographic boundary. And so I think that we can kind of nuance some of this and continue those lines of thinking in terms of community work. Some communities straddle the borders, right? So there's a lot of exchange for work. There's a lot of exchange for schools and everything else.
definitely. Thanks, Natasha. I'm definitely gonna, follow up with you on those and see what we can do to
Great.
get more kind of connections and support on the New Hampshire side.
Yeah.
Just get those dots connected.
I went on Lebanon's solid waste facility website yesterday and saw that, they had done a pilot program on composting that started in December and went to July. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's a very interesting kind of, NHPR did a summary of that pilot project. And it ended up that there were only like 11 families that stuck through it from the beginning. But of the 11 families, they diverted like almost 1.2 tons of compost from the dump.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also interesting, and I don't know anything about this, but there's some different rules in New Hampshire about composting. And one of them, I think they noted on that web page that we can't put dairy and meat in compost in the state. And there's a movement to change that regulation. And it's, quote, on the governor's desk, unquote. That was in July.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I mean, in Vermont, I think I mentioned this before, there's definitely, like Kat said before, within Vermont state law, if you're diverting your organics and your backyard composting, you can, per the law, still put bones and dairy and oil or anything like that into the landfill, as long as you're composting at home the rest of it. If you're having it hauled or dropping it off at a commercial facility, you have to do everything. You have to bring it all, because and again, it comes back to that cold composting versus hot composting, and wanting people to feel safe and in terms of health, as well as in terms of potential animal human interactions. And so, but in terms of the composting process, gosh, it's surprising. Even for commercial composters in the state of New Hampshire, they're not allowed to do meat and dairy. I've never even heard of that. Kat, I don't know if you have different experience with that, but usually for commercial facilities that are definitely getting those hotter temperatures.
I can't say for sure that it was not commercial, that it was included commercial facilities.
Okay.
I don't know how many of those we have actually either.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about the limit on how much can be hauled. And, I'm very unclear about all the regulations, but it seems like it's not as friendly to composting in this state as it is in your state.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
Would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that can be done, and there's a real movement. I mean, I think it's really a matter of timing more than, a matter of when rather than if other states come on board. I think there's a wave happening of food waste awareness and compost being one, and diversion from landfills, and real issues with how our landfills are being managed on all kinds of levels.
Yes.
And I think with that naturally comes these. And then I don't want to overwhelm with or get a little too off course, but the U.S. Composting Council has a number of great resources. Our organization is a member, but they do have a public-facing side of their website with a ton of resources that you don't need to be a member to access. And part of them does include, and they do a lot of work around providing draft language for regulations everywhere from like the municipal level on up. And so, so they work with communities, they work with municipalities, they work with states, they work on the federal level. And so having some of this language and sort of understanding a little bit of of that regulatory landscape at some point might be helpful, Maureen, at least for you in terms of what, some of our conversations have been, but maybe for the rest of you, it does all overlap, but it just depends on how much of a deep dive you want to get into. But I'm a member of their Legislative Education and Action Council as a U.S. Composting Council member, and so I could also try to find some just links to make it easier if that would be of interest to this group. But it's coming. We've got good advocates and folks in DC, folks at every level pushing for lobbying for better management of our resources. That's my optimistic hat for the day. If you caught me on a different day, I might sound a little less optimistic.
Can I ask a question of our teachers? Who's are you all three from Unity? Norma and Becca and Maureen, I'm sorry.
I'm from New London.
New London. Okay. Are either of your schools looking at using composting as a part of your curriculum?
So Unity is just we started talking with Olivia in the winter of last year and kind of getting things started. But since then we've had a new principal and we do have a greenhouse. So there are definitely some good benefits to composting, but it's just two of us right now. So definitely we'd be starting off small with our own classrooms and maybe just trying to reduce our waste and trying to figure out how we can get a compost system started on a small scale, I guess. We had composted before, back when we first got into our building. Just pretty much we all had like a little pail and we'd have the kids put the stuff in it. And we had a rotating system, I believe. I really wasn't a part of it except for composting like my stuff and putting it in the bin. So this is kind of new to me besides just what can go in the compost and what can't. So definitely learning, and I'm going to be out this fall for a surgery. So just trying to figure out how it's all going to work. But Becca, you can add on if you want.
I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, I definitely think we would be open to, if we start the program, we would probably want to incorporate lessons into our curriculum to use with it, to teach the kids what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we're sort of in the planning process currently, so.
Right. And how about you, Maureen?
Well, I'm actually a retired person. So I am interested in this for our school, but my contact person told me that given the demands on teachers this year that they could not start it this year. But I wanted to take advantage of this training just so that I could lobby for next year. And there is one school, Kristen was here last week, there is one school in our district who expressed an interest, but she also is not a teacher. She's a PTA member. So I think we have community interest. We definitely have community interest in the town. So we're at ground zero, Kat.
Gotcha. I'm asking that question because I know that in some cases it's a selling point for a yes or a no from administrators and funders. It's my experience and my opinion that schools shouldn't be in the business of managing waste unless we're learning from it on some level, and that could look like 1,000 different things. And what we found to be most successful, other than the obvious, like science is really easy with a compost, but math and history, I mean, the history of composting is pretty fascinating. You can go all the way back 10,000 years. And learn about the pastoral society moving into agrarian societies and why composting even became an issue. And you can talk about, how the Fertile Crescent became a desert. That's the short story, of course. But so there's a lot of history there and writing that's involved too. But what I hear from our students is that math is more meaningful to them now because the data, the numbers that they're using are ones that they entered into the spreadsheet. They mean something to them. And we're able to ask scientific inquiry questions and develop word math problems. And it means something to them. And I find student feedback like that to be really inspiring.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely we would want to do lessons, or just like you said, like trying to make it hands-on for the students, gathering the data, collecting the data, graphing it, whatever it may be. But definitely, you know, teaching them. And I love the idea of the history of composting. So thank you for that.
You bet. And I wanted to plug that idea Jennifer had about the sensor. That is so cool. I mean, I'm also trying to teach kids to read like a thermometer, you know, and I have 3 thermometers we leave in the bin, which is not good for the thermometer, but it's how we manage to not break or lose them. And we do the 2-foot thermometer so they get different depths. And I purposefully chose 3 that read differently. So they have to be careful. And that works for us, but I think they would love the digital, like that piece, that connectivity. I love it. It's great. I'm going to suggest it to them.
It also will graph for you.
Right. Even better.
Well, isn't in the schools now, everything you do has to be connected to the curriculum outcomes. So it's sort of like you would want to do that because it implements the curriculum, seems to me.
I personally think that the support that we have and the input and the information that we're getting from you guys is very helpful. Because like I said, we tried it at Unity before and it wasn't successful. And I think it was because we didn't have all of those connections. And it was a para who was working with the composting and didn't really have a lot of student involvement as well. So I think that that's a key piece, and bringing lessons and the history and all of that. And like I said, your support and all of your information has been very helpful, and we'll definitely be reaching out for sure.
Thank you so much, especially to Kat and Jennifer and Natasha for really leading this effort today and the last couple weeks, and Becca, Maureen, and Norma, and joining everyone else who is not here today. Hope you guys have a great evening.